what you about? I opened my eyes and looked around, trying to make out where I was. It was after sunup, and I had been sound asleep. Pop was standing over me looking sour and sick too, he says. What you doing with this gun? I judged he didn't know nothing about what he had been doing, so I says, somebody tried to get in, so I was laying for him. Why didn't you roust me out? Well, I tried, but I couldn't. I couldn't budge you. Well, all right. Don't stand there palaver-ing all day, but out with you and see if there's a fish on the lines for a break fast. I'll be along in a minute. He unlocked the door, and I cleared out up the river bank. I noticed some pieces of limbs and some things floating down and sprinkling of bark, so I know the river had begun to rise. I reckon I would have a great time now if I was over at the town. The June rise used to be always luck for me, because as soon as that rise begins, here comes cordwood floating down and pieces of log rafts, sometimes a dozen logs together. So all you have to do is catch them and sell them to the wood yard and to the sawmill. I went along the bank with one eye for Pap and to the other out for what the rise might fetch along. Well, all at once here comes a canoe. Just a beauty too. About 13 or 14 foot long, right high like a duck. I head first off the bank like a fire closing off and stuck out for the canoe. I just expected there'd be somebody laying down in it, because people often done that too, fools folks. And when the chap had pulled a skiff, almost they'd be raised up and laugh at him. But it weren't so this time. It was a drift canoe, sure enough, and I climbed in and paddled her ashore. Thinks I, the old man will be glad when he sees this. She's worth $10. But when I got to shore, Pap wasn't in the sight yet. But as I was running her into a little creek, like a gully, all hung up over the vines and willows, I struck another idea. I judged I hide her good. And then, instead of taking to the woods when I run off, I'd go down the river and 50 miles, crap into one place for good. Not having such a rough time tramping on foot. It was pretty close to the shanty, and I thought I heard the old man coming along all the time. But I got her hid. Went out and I looked around a bunch of willows, and there was the old man down the path of peace, just drawing a bead on the bird with his gun. So he hadn't seen anything. When he got along, I was hard at it, taking up a trout line. He abused me a little for being so slow, but I told him I fell in the river, and that was what made me so long. I knowed he would see I was wet, and then he would be asking questions. We got 5 catfish out in the line and went home. While he laid off after breakfast to sleep up, both of us began being about wore out. I got to thinking that if I could fix up some way to keep Pap and the widow from trying to follow me, it would be a certainer thing than trusting to luck to get far enough off before they mess me. You see, all kinds of things might happen. Well, I didn't see no way for a while, but by and by, Pap raised up a minute to drink another barrel of water, and then he says, another time a man comes to prowling around here, roust me out, you hear? That man weren't here for no good. I'd shoot him. Next time he roused me out, you hear? Then he dropped down and went to sleep again. What he'd been saying gave me the very idea I wanted. I says to myself, I can fix it now so nobody won't think of following me. About 12 o'clock we turned out and went along up the bank. The river was coming up pretty fast and lots of the driftwood going by on the rise. By and by along comes a part of a log raft, 9 logs fastened together. We went out with the skiff and towed it ashore. Then we had dinner. Anybody but Pop and A waited and seen the day through, so as to catch more stuff. But that weren't Pap's style. 9 logs was enough for one time. He must have shoved it right over to town and sell. So he locked me in and took the skiff and started off to tow the raft about 3:30. I judged he wouldn't come back that night. I waited till I reckoned he had got a good start. Then out with my saw and went to work on the log cabin again. Before it was on the other side of the river, I was out of the hole. Him and his raft was just a speck on the water away off yonder. I took the sack of cornmeal and took it to where the canoe was hid and shoved the vines and branches apart and put it in. Then I done the same with the side of bacon, the whiskey jug. I took all the coffee and the sugar there was and all the ammunition. I took the wadding. I took the bucket and gourd. I took the dipper and tin cup and my old saw and 2 blankets. The skillet, my coffee pot. I took fish lines, matches, and other things. Everything that was worth the set. I cleaned out the place. I wanted that axe, but there wasn't any. Only the one out at the woodpile, and I knew why I was going to leave that. I fetched out the gun, and now I was done. I wore the ground a good deal, crawling out a hole and dragging out so many things. So I fixed that as good as I could. As good as I could. I fetched out the gun, and now I was done. I wore the ground a good deal, crawling out the hole and dragging out so many things. So I fixed that as good as I could from the outside by scattering dust on the place which covered up the smoothness and the sawdust. Then I fixed the piece of log back into its place and put 2 rocks under it and one against to hold it in there. For it was bent up in the place and didn't quite touch the ground. If you stood 4 or 5 feet away and didn't know if it was sawed, you would never notice it. And besides, this was the back of the cabin, and it weren't like anybody would go fooling around.